you smell that? Football is in the air. And that means one thing. We are back full time. So let's get into it. This is Iceman and Coach. As the summer winds down, the trees start to turn, and that means the old pigskin on the gridiron is back in play, and that means that we are at our best. Welcome back to Iceman and Coach, everybody. This is the Iceman, Matt Frates. That is the coach, Brad Powell. Brad, what is up, my buddy?
Iceman, doing well, my friend, and very excited for football season. I feel like this year, more so than ever, I realized how empty because we had softball. My daughter played softball through once on the heels of basketball season, right through May, through June. The last month and a half have been brutal. There's just, the Olympics were a saving grace, but other than that, there's really nothing going on that I'm that interested in. I love baseball, but I have a hard time dedicating time to watching it consistently, and I'm looking forward to football season, and this is the perfect time of year where you start seeing other shows similar to ours and larger shows. Everyone is getting excited. There's a lot of hope in the air, a lot of prognosticating that's happening, and overall, just a ton of excitement.
It's funny you talk about waiting for football to come back and how in years past maybe you haven't felt the sort of emptiness that not having football has provided you this year. And it's funny because we talked about it offline, how we feel like this show is better during football season because it's a sport that we know more about, especially college football. We're very, very passionate about it. And we covered it so well last year. And we say well in the relative term. We're not doing this professionally. But the idea is that we are better when we are talking about sports that are more engaging. And while we are an overall encompassing sports show and we can talk about everything if we want, we have chosen to sort of go down a different path. And so I think that the way you felt this year and the way that this show ended up being is sort of a microcosm for how the show is going to be going forward. And I can't say that I'm not excited about it. What about you?
I agree. And I think, we're both just general sports fans, right? We enjoy the other sports. We enjoy baseball. We enjoy the NBA and some of the other lesser known sports that come along. Obviously, everyone knows I'm a wrestling fan, and so there's other things that I'm interested in, and I know there's other things that you're interested in. But I feel like this is our wheelhouse a little bit, and not in the sense that we're experts by any means, but as far as a genuine, passionate interest in the sport as a whole, not just for our prospective teams, but the whole landscape, and especially on the college side, there's just so much tradition and pageantry and storylines that come along with it, and it's really hard not to be excited about it. And then just the NFL is it's the biggest thing out there in the world of sports, at least in this country, and it's really hard not to acknowledge the excitement that comes along with NFL Sunday as well.
Yeah, I think every weekend from almost now until basically the Super Bowl, for the most part, I think you and I get that sort of fatigue as we get to the end of the regular season in the NFL, but certainly September, October, November, all the way up until conference championship weekend is pretty much every weekend is appointment television when it comes to college, the NFL, especially with Red Zone. And so I think it's actually good for us to acknowledge the fact that we are better as podcasters and hosts when we're talking about things like football that we actually like. And certainly college basketball is going to be right on the heels of that. And so Coach and I are sort of, I guess you could say, announcing it, but we are going to change up the format, I guess, or the cadence a little bit of this show and kind of do what we did for the last year. And while maybe it goes against conventional wisdom as it relates to keeping an audience and consistency, it works best for us and those of us who ride with us now or ride with us during this whole thing. And so we are happy to announce that instead of Football Friday, it is going to be Football Frenzy, and it will be on Wednesday evenings, probably around 9 o'clock Eastern. We haven't quite gotten to that point yet. But the idea is that it's going to be live. We're going to talk about college football, and we're going to talk about the NFL in their own segments. And then we have a little bit of a surprise as we are going to replay each of those segments, college football on Saturday mornings and NFL on Sunday mornings, because we want people who can't catch us live to be able to catch the content that they want. And so we're going to be doing things a lot differently than we did last year, sort of. And I'm excited about it because I think it provides a lot of opportunity for us to sort of reach a new audience, so to speak, and to get into the more nitty gritty of both college and the NFL, because we focused a lot more on college last year. And I think there's just a lot that we can add and provide for the NFL. And so that's why today we're going to be previewing the entire NFL in the next 54 to 55 minutes.
Yeah, I think that we both realized and maybe underestimated how much we would have to say about what happened in the NFL. And as the season went on, we're like, man, like we kind of want to talk about the NFL too, you know? And it's hilarious to look back and to think that or I should even say, I maybe like sort of led the charge on this. They're like, hey, I don't know if I got a lot to say about the NFL. You know, I like it, but like I'm not like super engaged on a nuanced level. And turns out we had a lot of opinions about the NFL. So here we are. I think what we're going to do moving forward is great, splitting up between college football and the NFL, and then them both having their opportunity to shine on their respective days. So pumped about that. And, you know, like you said, we got the NFL preview coming up right here on this show, and I'm excited.
And also, if you're looking for a lot more detailed, and I would even almost say more knowledgeable NFL talk, you should check out the boys from Political Football on Tuesdays once the season starts, because they're doing a lot more in-depth analysis on the NFL. So we're going to do, like we always do, a more generalized look at some of the bigger storylines in both college and the NFL. And I think the audience that we're looking to cater to is if you're out there and you stand at a water cooler at an office, or you're just one of those people who wants to talk about sports with somebody who will listen, that's where we come in. And that's the kind of analysis we're going to provide. We're going to be wrong. We're probably going to get things ignorantly wrong at times, but the idea is that we're fans just like you. And so just roll with us, because we're going to give you the best that we have. And you are right, though. The NFL, there is a lot to talk about. And I don't know if last year, maybe we did underestimate what we had to say about it. But I know you and I talked a lot about the NFL offline, and it was kind of a shame that some of that got lost and some of that never made it to air.
I agree. And there's, and I think that, you know, sometimes I think it's important when you do things like this, podcast or whatever the case may be, any sort of content creation, to take a step back and remove your own personal preference from the equation once in a while and say like, hey, I know that I'm really interested in this and talking like in nuance about this, but is this something that like the average person really gives a crap about? And most average people are probably way more interested and invested in the NFL than like I am. And so having to acknowledge that, like, and then again, foolish of me to assume that I wouldn't have a lot to say about what was happening in the NFL. But I think you have to kind of step back and look at the big picture and realize what the majority of people are into, and you know, jump right in and join them with having your own personal opinion about things. And you know, so it is super exciting.
We have personal opinions. Sometimes they're not great opinions, right, but we have them.
Well, this is like football 101, right? And you go to political football if you want like the 600 level football talk.
Yeah, we're entry level. Let's put it that way. We're the interns that are doing the NFL work. But let's kind of get into it, right? Because the NFL offseason, so I will freely admit that NFL offseason stuff really doesn't excite me the way that it does other people, even the draft. And I know that I have helped out on the draft coverage for political football before, but like as it relates to the draft in general, where guys go, what kind of scouting people are doing on it, it's just never really been my jam. And so it's not something that intrigues me. But as we get closer to the season and as we get closer to that first snap in week one and we kind of get an idea of the landscape, I start to wake up a little bit kind of like the groundhog on Groundhog Day. But there were some things that kind of took place over the offseason that were at least worth mentioning. We're probably going to forget a few, but the first one that comes to my mind is the return of Aaron Rodgers to the Jets minicamp and all the drama that happened, I don't know, like a month ago, about him not making or not attending mandatory minicamps because he had some type of an engagement. And it, to me, speaks to the dysfunctional nature of the Jets in the fact that it sounds like he told them about this and Robert Saleh, the coach, decided to just, I don't want to say be an asshole by saying I never approved it, but it seemed like it was a mutual approval of what was going on. And I think a lot of veterans get this kind of preference. And you know me, not really a big Aaron guy these days, But it would make me nervous if I were a Jets fan, if that's what we're dealing with already. And Aaron, his bullshit level is like way low. So you got to be careful with him.
Yeah, this is one of these situations where I'm like overhearing about the Aaron Rodgers
Yeah.
drama a little bit, and it's like if if the biggest thing you have going on in the news about you is like your personality and off the field things, that's usually not a good sign. I mean, think back through just history of like issues that ended up in the news and in the media about uh personality conflicts, Des Bryant issues, maybe T.O. with the sit-ups in the driveway, all these, and these aren't like contract issues with Rodgers, but just like whenever your persona starts to outshine your performance on the field, it's usually not a recipe for success. Now, that being said, I will also reference back to my stance I have on if you can show up and perform, like, who cares, right? And I've said that about all the other personality things that you could, you want to bring up or that happen. I say, you know what? Like, we put too much on these guys. I think it's an unrealistic expectation to care too much about who they are off the field, because this is a business and their job is to be successful on the field and help their team win. And as long as they're doing that, these organizations, for the most part, could not care less about the rest. And we're foolish, I think, as fans sometimes to believe that these organizations do care about any of that other stuff. And so, again, I want to make sure I reference that, and that if he shows up and plays ball, no one's going to remember any of this.
No, and that's why I thought Robert Saleh saying something to the media felt like he was almost trying to establish some semblance of dominance when we all know that for the most part, a player like Aaron Rodgers has all the power, has all the leverage, and the Jets need him more than he needs the Jets. Especially after last year, like the ante has been raised, and we're going to get into that when we talk about the AFC East, but I just was like, man, the Jets can't seem to get out of their own way as it relates to these types of things. Whenever they have something that is nice, they're the team almost that is not allowed to have nice things. And this was just another example of that.
Well, and I think in a situation like the Jets and with Robert Saleh, he hopes obviously to, have a career with the Jets long beyond Aaron Rodgers, right? Rodgers has maybe a year or two in him, I would assume, before he rides off into the sunset. And if Robert Saleh wants to have a career beyond that, he has to sort of establish, I guess, his own identity. And I'm sure he is a little apprehensive to like hitch his wagon to Aaron Rodgers too much, because once Rodgers is gone, how does that reflect on him if he's like, well, I just let this guy steer the ship the whole time he was here and let him walk all over me. So I can see where he feels a need to assert himself in some way. But it could also, with a guy like Aaron Rodgers and the way that he can be at times, it's certainly a risky proposition.
Yeah, but the quarterback is your most important position, which is why we saw quarterbacks sign for big money. That I won't lie to you. I understand the economics in terms of the market sort of continuing to grow. And whenever a quarterback is up, it seems like these owners feel the need that they have to pay him whatever the going rate is. But both Jordan Love and Tua, both of them signed for big money. And Jordan Love kind of is leveraging off of one good year for the most part. Tua is a guy who, while he's had success in spurts, when the chips have been down, the team and him to an extent have not really performed. And so teams get into this place where if they don't pay him, they got to find somebody else. And that's kind of where the NFL has gone to. And I'm thinking about Tua making, $53 million a year. I don't know how sustainable this is going to be in the long term. I mean, it probably will be, just because NFL franchises continue to be worth more and more with tickets going up, merchandising going up, media rights, all that stuff. But I feel like now it feels like it might be hindering from a financial standpoint how much these quarterbacks are costing.
I agree. I was thinking about this earlier, looking through the notes for the show, and I said, okay, like, at what point, I'm like, how many of these quarterbacks are worth basically committing yourself to salary cap hell for the next decade to attempt to like win a Super Bowl now? And there's really only, like, I struggled, man. I like pulled up the list. I'm like rolling through. I'm like, initially I thought, like, okay, off the top of my head, off the cuff, I'm like, there's a handful of quarterbacks that like warrant, like, you pay them whatever you got to pay them. The Patrick Mahomes, I would say like Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen. There's a few guys that are in this conversation, but like there's a lot of guys. I mean, I'm just saying based off talent, right? Perceived talent. And you could even say like Joe Burrow, right? I mean, he can't keep himself on the field, but when he is, he's really good. And so, but it's like everyone knows that like you have to have an elite quarterback to win a Super Bowl. I mean, that seems to be the case, right? And there are exceptions, but for the most part, you have to have an elite quarterback to compete for a Super Bowl.
Well, in
And
today's NFL, for sure.
yeah, and so it's like everyone's playing the part of like, hey, we're doing that, but they're paying B, C level quarterbacks A level money because it's like they feel like they don't have a choice. And I mean, it's very weird. And I don't know if there's something like behind the scenes, if like maybe there's in some way, shape, or form, like a GM feels like they sort of like get job security if they lock up a quarterback for a few years, because then the narrative is like, hey, we're paying this guy, and so let's see this through. And let's not, because if like, okay, we fire I mean, what are we gonna do? Fire the GM? We're still stuck with the quarterback. Let's like, I don't know if there's something to that. I'm not sure. I don't know. I don't know enough about the details of the salary cap and how it can be structured, but it makes you wonder like how teams are going to be able to afford to put guys around these elite quarterbacks at some point in time.
That's
And how
really
long are
where
these diva wide receivers going to like live with it?
Well, let's take the Cowboys, for instance, and we were going to talk about this a little bit later, but both Dak and CeeDee Lamb are looking to get paid, right? And a lot of people are saying if Dak doesn't sign with the Cowboys, he's going to get $60 million somewhere else. Should the Cowboys sign him to $60 million with the body of work that they have? It's a different story for Tua and Jordan Love or Jordan Love, at least, you have a very limited sample size, at least for what I would be comfortable with investing that kind of money. Tua is a little bit different, but like Dak has been the starter for 8 years or 9 years or whatever. And yes, he's had some time where he's been injured, but I think we kind of know what Dak Prescott is all about. And so when he's coming up now for $60 million a year, the Cowboys, I think rightly are saying, I don't think we should pay him that. But most owners are just finding a way to pay these guys and make sure they get the guaranteed money, which is so fascinating because these owners are usually guys who, even though they're rich, they generally tend to be cheap. That's how you stay rich in a lot of ways. And
Right.
Instead of thinking, is this person worth $60 million? They just say, yeah, we have to pay this guy. It's fascinating because they don't do it for almost any other position.
Well, it's like the devil thing, right? I think that they're so scared of moving off of an average quarterback, or even an above average quarterback. They're so scared of moving off and ending up in a worse situation. And I think too, what a lot of us forget is while we would hope that most of these owners are motivated by championships, they're businessmen. And they are just in the business of staying in business, right? And making money. And you know what? You know what continues to make money and sell tickets? Being 10-7, 11-6 consistently.
Hopium.
You know what I mean? Hopium. Yes, hopium keeps the cash machine a turning, man. It keeps tickets selling. It keeps butts in the seats, keeps eyeballs on the TV, keeps whatever other revenue rolling in. And it's almost like once you win a Super Bowl, it's like, well, what do you do then? Like, what now? The standard is like that or bust, and it's like you're almost better off from a business standpoint, just like knocking on the door of it consistently. And if you can just stay there for a while, I mean, look at the Cowboys. I mean, the Cowboys have kind of mastered this over the last, I don't know, in the Dak tenure.
Yes,
right. I would
lately.
say they have been expertly above average, and
it's a good way to look
good
at
enough. You know what I mean? Good enough to keep people engaged and to go into every season with hope and optimism, and to keep showing up to games, but not good enough to threaten to win a Super Bowl.
Yeah,
and I don't. And people want to get mad at like the Daks of the world. You can't blame Dak, man.
He should go after every penny.
They're paying him. They're willing to pay it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? He is just the byproduct of misguided ownership, I guess, if that's what you want to call it. I don't know, but you can't blame these guys for going after it.
Plus, ownership would drop them like a bad habit.
Yeah. For sure.
So the players need to look out for themselves. I used to feel that way, but I don't anymore. But also happening here, we have some new coaches, and I think the one that's going to get the most headlines is obviously Jim Harbaugh out in LA with the Chargers, and what can he do there? And we'll talk about that a little bit later. There's a lot of other coaching moves too, new guys in new places. I mean, no Bill Belichick at all in the league. And so there is a new landscape in the NFL. At least maybe that's where some of this excitement comes from, is it feels like we're kind of turning over a new leaf. The old era is officially over. We also have a bunch of new and returning quarterbacks, obviously with this rookie class coming in, but you got Burrow coming back from injury, Anthony Richardson coming back from injury for the Colts, right? So there's a lot to look at here when you talk about returning, and even guys like CJ Stroud in their sophomore year. Like, what are they going to see out of that? And then the new kickoff rules, which admittedly I don't know all the intricacies of it, but when I was a UFL season ticket holder, I saw the kickoff rules, at least an adaptation of them in the real world. And I will say that I did see 2 kickoff returns for touchdowns. So there is some strategy that maybe the kickoff will be back and it'll be safe. But I just don't, the NFL struggles with how to make it exciting and safe at the same time, because look, football's violent.
Yeah. And so I kind of dug into this a little bit,
Good.
And I'm gonna take
Please.
this. Maybe this is like in the vein of stat of the day a little bit.
Yeah, I'm going to give you the camera by yourself now. Go ahead.
No, I don't need that.
No.
But so last year there were 2,698 kickoff plays in NFL games.
Okay.
How many of those do you think were returned for a touchdown?
Maybe 0, maybe 1.
4.
More than I thought.
Okay. And then out of the 2,698, 1,970 resulted in a touchback. Okay. So only just shy of 22% of them were returned at all. So I think that people get up in arms of this is stupid. It's not like it was taking away something that you had that you're now going to be without.
Yes.
If anything, it's going to potentially increase the amount of return plays that happen. Because I do think there are some things put in for the kickoff. Like if it's kicked out of the end zone, I believe you get it at the 30 for the touchback. If it's lands within the field of play, then it's only the 20 or 25 or whatever. But so there's some things put in there. I mean, they're trying to encourage returns, but they're just putting people in a different position on the field to try to improve safety of the collisions. The weird part, of course, is the onside kick situation where you have to, you can only do it in the fourth quarter. You have to be losing and you have to call your shot before you do it. Now, I mean, my dad asked the question and he's like, well, are they still going to, when they line up for an onside, is it going to look like the old way? I would say, I assume so. I don't know how else you would go about it. I mean, I would guess
that will probably be the rule. Kind of remember how a couple years ago you could challenge pass interference, and it seemed like a good correction to make based off of things that we saw. Part of me feels like the new onside kick rule is going to be not that big of a deal. I don't know how often we'll see it. It's like the Sean Payton rule, right? But you're calling your shot. And that seems to me not how general strategy works in the NFL. Normally you try to feign your strategy so that the opponent doesn't know what you're going to do. But I don't know. Maybe we'll see some exciting stuff. I mean,
I imagine that the NFL probably went back and looked at tons of data and said, okay, over the last X amount of years, how many onside kicks have there been? How many of them happened in the first 3 quarters? How many of them resulted in a successful recovery by the kickoff team? And so on and so forth. And try to, I guess, analyze the impact on the game that it had. And I imagine, and you could say, well, hey, all it takes is one, and it could change the trajectory of a franchise, or
sure,
the Saints in the Super Bowl or whatever, coming out of the halftime. But I would guess if they thought this was going to hurt the league, they wouldn't have done it.
No.
And you don't not change something because of an outcome that's 1 out of 4,000. You know what I mean?
I agree.
And I think that's where they're at with the situation is we're not going to not change it because 1 out of 4,000 times it's going to make for an exciting play.
Yeah. And the other thing that has changed that I think we have not talked about yet is the banning of the hip drop tackle. Let me say that again. And I don't know if you remember 2 years ago when we first started doing Iceman and Coach, we did an episode on injuries, and you, from your coaching perspective, talked about how the art of tackling is probably what's causing a lot of these injuries because of all the rules that have been put into place, defensive players not being able to do what is almost instinctual in how you coach these things. And now you're taking out another element that, while yes, it has given I can't even think of the word, but it has caused some injury. But at the same time, I think it's not necessarily as big of an impact. It just seems that way, kind of almost like an airplane crash where you know about them because it's all over the place, but it's not like they happen all the time. That one will be interesting because defensive players are getting to the point now where it's almost touch football, and that's maybe sensationalism, but I think you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, it is a difficult thing, and you're right. It's like, airplanes when, we hear about all the crashes because they're so devastating when they do happen, even though
Yes,
that they're so infrequent. Just like these major collisions, when they do happen, like the Tua stuff, right? When his eggs were all scrambled and it's right there on national TV for everybody to see, that stuff draws a lot of eyes and a lot of attention. And I I don't know. It's really hard. It's a really hard problem to solve because, like you said just a little while ago, football is a very violent game, and I don't know how you can maintain the integrity of what the game is without, significantly without there being risk of serious injury. I just it's tough. And I know when I was coaching, I mean, we went through. We seems like the way we would teach tackling sort of evolved, as it should. But like there was a while where like the rugby style tackle was sort of like the rage, and it was more of it was sort of reverting back to the older style of tackling where like you go for the legs, like go for the hips, but it was to like take your head out of the equation, and it was more of a hit, drive through, and almost like roll with the guy, and it was a safe tackle, but also not the easiest tackle to do fundamentally correct either, especially at full speed. Um, and so I don't know what they're going to do. I mean, you've seen the things now where they're wearing the Guardian caps
I
and
have.
stuff in games and whatever. And like people might think, I don't care what they wear, man.
No.
They could wear whatever they want as long as it still looks like football. I mean, that's what's important to me, I guess. Whatever they got to wear to feel safe and to be safe and the game to still exist as it should. Um, I'm fine with that.
Yeah, and you're always going to have people who it was better back in my day, and that's fine. It can be better back in your day, but things evolve, and that's kind of just how the
The
world works,
players
man.
don't the players don't want it to be extremely dangerous. I mean, it's their
No.
livelihood, and then people think that, like, trust me, the players probably want it to be less contact than it is currently, I would bet. I would bet
Yes.
you that a lot of players are fully in support of almost every possible, thing that comes forward to make the game safer.
I think that the ease at which these players and athletes rehab from what is a devastating injury to us, like if I tore my Achilles or you tore your ACL, we would not come back in 4 to 5 months. It would take us forever to come back because our bodies are not in prime condition. But these players, the rehab is hard. They don't like to rehab. Who does? Who wants to have a catastrophic injury that you now have to come back from? If you ask Dak Prescott, hey, would you rather football be less violent and you wouldn't have to have that severed ankle? I think he'd say, yeah, I probably would like that because we don't even know. That could have changed his entire life. It could have changed how he's going to act and how he's going to feel when he's in his 60s sometime. We don't know. I think you're right about that. That's a very good point. I didn't even think about that. The players, there's probably a vast majority of them who would be all in favor of, yeah, the game might look a little bit differently. So the Guardian helmets go on. Okay, well, they just start branding them with the team brand on it, right? It won't make a difference because it's not like the faces underneath the mask actually get marketed the way the NBA does or any type of sport where you actually see their face. So I'm with you on that. But let's talk about the NFL as a whole. And we're going to start in the AFC and we'll just kind of go down, give some brief thoughts here as we get to the end of the episode. But let's talk about the AFC East. And is it fair to say that the last few seasons, the AFC East has run through Buffalo?
Oh, absolutely. There's no doubt about that.
And would you contend that maybe this year, the Bills' window may be closing?
Oh man, it's tough. I think that you know, as long as you have a guy like Josh Allen there, I think that they've got to be in the conversation. And I was thinking about this earlier, and I don't want to go on too long about it because I know we have a lot to cover. Josh Allen reminds me a lot of John Elway, right?
That's a good
Where
comparison.
Elway was 15 years into his career before he finally won a Super Bowl, I think, or something close to that. And now, granted, he went to the Super Bowl like 2 or 3 times really early
I
and
think
lost,
two, yeah.
and yeah, and um, Josh Allen hasn't done that. He's been close, but I think that as long as you have a guy with his talent there, that it's just going to take the right mix of guys and coaching, and I think there's always going to be the opportunity for them to compete for a championship. And fortunately for them, the Patriots are in a rebuild. We talked a little bit about the Jets and their dysfunction, which seems like you can count on. It's like you could count on the Jets dysfunction as much as you could count on the Patriots being good under Belichick. It's just like so consistent. Um, and then obviously the emerging team is the Dolphins, right?
Yes.
And so, obviously they just paid Tua a bunch of money, so let's see what happens there. And and obviously, Mike McDaniels is definitely like the new age, modern version of a head football coach in the NFL. And we're gonna find out, like, is that really like, is that gonna be what works, or is this sort of a fad? And we'll revert back to the old crusty guys like Belichick.
Maybe it's too much to say that the window's closing, but I think the Bills look like they're going to have a down year this year. While maybe the division overall is still not as strong as it had been. And maybe it will be if Aaron Rodgers comes out and balls, then you got three really good teams there, theoretically. But I feel like they are losing weapons on offense where they traded Stephon Diggs in the offseason. Now he'd be kind of become a problem, so to speak. But Josh Allen seems to be a guy that can elevate. But without Gabe Davis, without Stephon Diggs, like, who else do they have? And I think that's what comes into question is, can guys step up and develop? And will they be able to compete against the cream of the crop the way that they kind of sort of haven't been able to in years, right? They've gone up against the Bengals and lost. They've gone up against the Chiefs and lost. They can't seem to get over the hump in the playoffs. But the rest of the division, so the Jets, I think, are the most intriguing team because of the emergence of Aaron Rodgers again. And I don't foresee him only getting 4 snaps this year. But it's funny because year 2 is almost supposed to be like the year that they kind of put everything together. But they never got that year last year. And I just can't, they're just a franchise I can't trust overall. The Dolphins are kind of in that same camp for me, too. I don't know if you've heard this stat, but I think in the last 2 seasons, Tua hasn't started all these games, but he started a majority of them. Like down the stretch, there's something like 6-15 in the last 2 seasons or something. So they're not a team that's gotten it done in crunch time, which that's coming up soon. And the Patriots are just going to be flat out bad. I mean, they traded Matthew Judon. I'm not even sure they're going to start Drake May this year. I think they're going to start Brissett, because they're just rebuilding, trying to get assets, trying to get pieces. So they're going to be super, super bad.
They got the kid from Tennessee too, don't they?
Yes.
I've heard like there's a lot of like hype about his skill set. Now, I think that people say that's always been the case with him, is his skill set's always impressed, but it just comes down to like, execution in the game. When everything gets going full speed and whatnot. But
the way you said that, it's like, oh, I mean, super talented. It just comes down to performing in the game. It's like, no shit.
Well, it's one thing to be able to, throw a laser. I mean,
of course,
in 7-on-7, and then
against me
under a pass rush
in a preseason game, basically.
And so, but that'll be interesting. They have an interesting mix in their quarterback room, right? You have Brissett, which is like the old veteran journeyman backup that's been around, and then obviously Drake May, the first round draft pick, right? And who kind of came out he's very highly touted, sort of that guy that's played a lot of football, that seems like he's ready, but I haven't heard a lot of positive things.
They've been holding
come out
back
of training camp a little bit.
Yeah.
And then obviously you got Joe Milton, who's got, like I said, the kind of fireworks of a skill set a little bit. And so I think you got 3 very different football players. And so it'll be very interesting to see kind of how that shakes itself out over the course of the season, especially if injuries create opportunities for some of those other guys.
Yeah, and it's a year for development. But I think the AFC East, to me, doesn't feel like the Bills' division to lose this year. I think that it could be up. It just depends on what happens with injuries and how things go. But your favorite division, the AFC North, of course, all that grit out there.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think the Ravens, you asked a question offline. I think it's worth posing here. Are the Ravens the current version with Lamar Jackson, the modern day Andy Reid Eagles? And do you have a theory there?
I just feel like they're very, very good. They're consistently good, consistently competing for the conference championship every year. It seems like a lot of folks pick them almost yearly for the last several years to be the AFC representative in the Super Bowl, or to at least contend with the Chiefs, I should say. It's just like they're always the bridesmaid, never the bride. And it feels a lot like the Andy Reid Eagles, because they were very similar. Now, they were just consistently losing in NFC championship games while he was there. The Ravens haven't quite had that stretch. But as far as being, I don't, I talked about the Cowboys being like expertly above average. Like, I feel like the Ravens are like a notch above that. Like, they are so close to being one of those franchises, like having like if it wasn't for Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid, they may honestly be in the midst of some sort of a dynasty, truthfully,
They very
if
well
it
could
wasn't
be.
for Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid. And so maybe it's not even like a discredit to the Ravens. It's more of just the teams they have to compete with currently. But just to be as good as they are and have not quite been able to get over the hump, um, is what made me draw that comparison.
Yeah, I mean, they're a well-run organization. I think you can argue that because they do
Yeah.
very well in the draft. They generally make good decisions in free agency and any types of trades that they do. I mean, they got incredible value for Lamar Jackson where they traded up to pick him with the last pick in the first round. When now, if you go back and do a redraft, he's probably number one, right? Or number two, depending on who else was in that draft. But my point is they do business very well. And they've won Super Bowls. So it's not as if this franchise hasn't gotten over the hump in general. And this is not saying that Harbaugh is early Andy Reid. He's proven himself, in my opinion. But the team as it's made up now, the last few years, does seem like they can't quite get over the hump. But as you said, the Chiefs are there. So it kind of, and I mean, for the Eagles, there were other teams that were there too that just seemed to keep beating them. But this division has the potential to be the best division in football again. I mean, that's not necessarily crazy, but you got the quarterback battle in Pittsburgh, which could be interesting because neither one of them looks good in preseason right now. But you got Fields, who I feel like I don't think he has it, and you know how I feel about Russ. But Mike Tomlin hasn't had a losing season yet, so he somehow seems to figure it out every single year. And obviously last year, the Browns were really good. That defense was elite. They got to the playoffs with Joe Flacco. I almost said Joe Burrow, Joe Flacco. And if they get a healthy Watson this year, is it possible that they could continue to ascend? And of course, Joe Burrow is back. So the Bengals could be back in the mix the way that they were not last year. This is a division that could get three teams in if everything falls right. And, that's good for us.
Yeah, the one thing that the Ravens have going for them is they have the consistency of the quarterback in place that's been in place. Obviously, you mentioned the battle that's happening in Pittsburgh. You're hoping you get a healthy Deshaun Watson back in Cleveland. And then Burrow, obviously, his injury history has been well documented. And having him on the field for a full season is critical to the Bengals' success. So I think that the Ravens have a leg up coming into the season for sure. It'll be interesting to see out of those other three teams who can get things on track the fastest, and to kind of work the kinks out and get a few wins under their belt and get things moving in the right direction sooner than the rest. And I was thinking about Mike Tomlin and the Steelers earlier, and the conclusion I came to was this is exactly like the type of situation that Mike Tomlin probably loves. He's like, man, nobody thinks that we're going to be any good. And I think that he probably is one of those guys that thrives under being maybe the underdog, or undervalued. And so I'm like really hesitant to like be too critical of the Steelers because I feel like they could be, and I'm not a Russ guy, and I agree with you. I don't think Fields has it either.
I don't.
But, and that's, I think, what's driving me even more to think like I will not be shocked if the Steelers find a way to pull a rabbit out of their hat, and have a good season.
10-7, right? With a combo of an old Russell Wilson and a potentially below average Justin Fields. Like that just I mean, they went 8-8 one year with Duck Hodges and Mason Rudolph. So Mike Tomlin seems to be able to do quite a bit, but it's been harder, obviously, without Roethlisberger and without all that talent. But he seems to know what he's doing. The one thing I will say before we move on to the AFC South is Joe Burrow. If he gets hurt again this year, then I'm going to slap the injury-prone label on him. I mean, you could probably give it to him now, but he has a lot of high highs. But Cleve the other day said he could be like Andrew Luck, where he's got immense
That's exactly
talent.
What just popped in my head. I'm like, freaking Andrew Luck, man. That's what's going to be.
But I don't think he'll retire the way Andrew Luck retired. Now, to also be fair, the Colts did kind of run that guy into the ground with all their penny pinching on the offensive line. The Bengals haven't done that yet. Burrow seems to get hurt a lot, and we'll see what happens. But AFC South, my least favorite division in all of football. But surprisingly, the Texans could actually be the team to beat here. Now, you always have the potential for a sophomore slump with C.J. Stroud. He had what I would say is a transcendent year last year. Many people, myself included, thought, hey, if he just doesn't get hurt, he's in good shape to continue to grow. He obviously looked great. They made the playoffs. And then, of course, you have Anthony Richardson coming back with the Colts, who were almost a playoff team with Gardner Minshew last year for the most part. We'll see what he looks like coming back, because I don't know how you feel, but there's some flashes there before he got hurt.
Yeah, the guy is supremely talented. I think that in the division as a whole, this year is critical for Trevor Lawrence, because
Yes.
I feel like if he can't keep CJ Stroud and the Texans at bay, then this is going to be the Texans division for the next decade. And and him and the Jags are going to be playing second fiddle, at least in the immediate future. Are going to be playing second fiddle to the Texans. And he's always, it's one thing to have to overcome a Mahomes in the AFC, but when he really, like, this is a critical year for him and his team down there in Jacksonville to assert themselves and to kind of like take hold of that division, because outside of the Texans, there's a lot of unknowns with the other two teams, with the Titans and the Colts. And, I think, the Colts are a real wild card right now. I have no idea what to expect. And then, the Titans are in a bit of a, new head coach. So let's call it a rebuild.
Yes.
Although I think that teams in the NFL franchises can rebuild or reboot much faster than teams can, it seems, in other pro sports. But, we'll see. But I think that it would be hard to say that the AFC South doesn't run through Houston right now.
The thing I forgot to bring up earlier was that Trevor Lawrence got paid also. And he's another guy in that camp of, he was the number 1 overall pick. A lot of people thought he was kind of like Andrew Luck in the fact that's a can't miss prospect. I'm not going to lie to you. The body of work has not made me feel like he's can't miss. Now, I don't think he's bad, and I'm not necessarily here to say bust, because I think that is reserved for when you're really bad. They've made the playoffs. Obviously, they have a win under their belt, but he hasn't, to me, gotten to the point where he is now to get paid, where you think that he should have figured some things out by now. He hasn't really looked that part to me. And so this is a year where, okay, you've been under the same head coach now. You have a ton of experience. You got paid. Now you have to perform to the level at which that contract says that you have to perform. And that's what I'm going to be looking for, because I do think if he doesn't, then he got overpaid.
You're not wrong. And this goes back to maybe our quarterback conversation and the crazy salaries they're making. I think that it's more important to have a well-run organization than it is to have a great quarterback. How many great elite college quarterbacks have we seen go to the NFL and save, revive, build a average to below average franchise?
Tom Brady, obviously.
But
6th round.
That's not even true, though.
I know.
They had Drew Bledsoe. It's just he just lucked into playing. Like, these
so much value in the 6th round.
A lot of these guys that have success are coming into decently ran organizations with an established culture, and I like even Andrew Luck. He kind of, in the sense at the time, the Colts were in a pretty good place when he landed there. They came out. It was kind of a fluke year because the Peyton Manning's neck was hurt, and so it's like, hey, well, we'll tank and get Andrew Luck. And that's kind of, I think, what happened. The Colts weren't great, I guess, when Peyton Manning was drafted.
No, he wasn't good either.
But think about how many of these other guys, which of course they've got some of their own issues personally, but the Johnny Manziels of the world. How many freaking first round, number 1 overall, top 5 picks have the Cleveland Browns cycled through?
Yep.
Over the years. And
Tim Couch.
So yeah, I think the organization as a whole plays more into it than the quarterback, because like you said, with Mike Tomlin, what's Mike Tomlin done in Pittsburgh? With whoever, Duck Hodges and Mason Rudolph, just go over 500 every year with whoever's taking snaps.
Keep selling those tickets, like you say.
Right. Yep. Keep selling those tickets, man. So, but you're right. It's Trevor Lawrence's time to put up or shut up for sure.
Oh, yes, it is. And maybe that's overly critical, but hey, that's my feeling and I'm sticking to it. Last, AFC West, obviously the Chiefs, defending Super Bowl champions. I think they got better. They drafted well this year. They're certainly trying to put fast, powerful guys around Patrick Mahomes. They're going to protect him. They're going to pay him. Chiefs are the epitome of a well-run organization right now. Jim Harbaugh in year 1 with the Chargers and obviously Justin Herbert, of course. We'll see what he can do transitioning back to the NFL where he was successful. Don't forget, made it to a Super Bowl with Colin Kaepernick, obviously made Alex Smith look like $1 million. So he's got the pedigree. He's done it before, just hasn't gotten to the mountaintop. The Raiders just decided that they're going to start Gardner Minshew, so they're going to be terrible. And the Broncos are going to be awful. Even though they drafted Bo Nix, they have a terrible quarterback room other than that, and I just don't trust Sean Payton, as you know. So AFC West, in my opinion, is the Chiefs to lose.
You're right. It is. I think it's one of the most interesting divisions this year, though, because I think that the Sean Payton Bo Nix combination could be interesting. I think this is Sean Payton's last shot at being relevant as a head coach in the NFL, as developing Bo Nix and turning him into a franchise quarterback and resurrecting the Broncos. Obviously, a lot to watch with the Chargers. I think that Harbaugh is kind of a quarterback whisperer or whatever, and has unique tactics, if you will. But there's been no debate really about Justin Herbert's skill set. It's just a matter of having someone that can implement it effectively. And I think that Jim Harbaugh is the guy. And then you have the Raiders. I'll be honest with you, man. I don't even know who the hell the Raiders coach is.
Antonio Pierce.
Who's playing quarterback for the Raiders this year?
Gardner Minshew.
Okay, all right. So, and you mentioned that I lost some internet there for a little bit while you were talking, and we looked out. So, I love me some Gardner Minshew, man. I will say that I loved him when he was, breaking the passing record at Wazoo with Mike Leach, and no, I mean, obviously, I liked him with the Colts, man. I wasn't even worried about it when Richardson got hurt and they turned things over to Gardner Minshew. I'd love to see it. He's the Uncle Rico of the NFL, at least in appearance. He's much more talented. But that's interesting, man. I was gonna say no one knows what the hell the Raiders are gonna be, and I guess that's true. But with Gardner Minshew, I mean, I feel like there's at least a fairly reasonable floor with a guy like that.
Yes, you definitely know what you're getting. You're getting some great games, and you're getting some really awful games, like that 10-6 game in London or in Germany last year with the Patriots. Yeah. So high, possible high ceiling, sometimes very low floor, and that's just what you have. But first-year coach Antonio Pierce took over when the Raiders fired their coach last year, and the players wanted him. He's a player's coach, but he doesn't have a lot of experience. And there are some guys that are getting head coaching experience or head coaching jobs that don't have a lot of experience. And I think some owners are trying to go for guys that the players love. And I think that player coaches work out as long as they are developed and have the ability to be a good head coach. Pete Carroll was a player's coach, but obviously knew what he was doing. And Andy Reid, I would say, is a player's coach as well, but obviously knows what he's doing. He's got rings to go with it. Bill Belichick, decidedly not a player's coach, but that's a different era. And so the Raiders, to me, are one of the worst or poorly run organization in the fact that they don't make a lot of good decisions with personnel. They don't make a lot of good decisions when it comes to hiring. I mean, just look at their coaching pedigree, just everything that has happened. And Al Davis can't be happy wherever he is right now. But you might be right. They could be sitting at about average, but I'm not convinced because I don't feel like the Raiders do very well when it comes to running their organization. But moving on to the NFC.
Hey, all I know is they got a sign on the wall somewhere that says tradition of excellence.
I'm sure
that's
all
I need to know.
Just win, baby. That's all. That's all they need to do. Speaking of a tradition of excellence, the Dallas Cowboys have been traditionally excellent just to a place. But this year, and I don't know if you remember this, Jerry Jones said, we're all in. And by going all in, they kept Mike McCarthy. They did not sign any free agents, and they had a decent draft, at least how you can grade it in the now. They have to pay Dak. They have to pay CeeDee Lamb. This is going to be a disaster for the Dallas Cowboys. I'm putting it out here right now, 8-9.
If you're a Cowboys fan, and you can ask your brother-in-law, Mike, if you're a Cowboys fan, how do you feel when your owner comes out and says, we're going all in this year?
And they do nothing.
What have you been doing the last however many years? And if this is the year you're finally going all in, I thought that's what last year was supposed to be, or the year before that. Or you should be going all in every year. Unless you're in a known rebuild, you should be going all in to compete for a championship. And so what makes you believe that this year is going to be any different than any year prior?
It's not.
I hate it. And I shouldn't say, I want to say I hate it for Cowboys fans because it would be brutal. But at the same time, you guys all subscribe to this crap. So you're in, man. You're along for the ride. I'm sorry, but expertly above average. And that's it.
I'm not even sure they'll be above average this year because, I have been on they got to get rid of Mike McCarthy train for a while because I don't think he has what it takes to get this group of guys to the next level. And again, we have a sample size. This isn't just 1 year. It's now 3 or 4 seasons where we've been dealing with this crap. And Jerry just doesn't want to get rid of guys who will say yes to him. Jason Garrett had the most prestigious coaching job in the NFL for a decade and produced nothing but clapping in 8-8. And so, outside of a couple of other seasons where they lost, that 2016 season when Tony Romo got hurt, Dak came in. But for the most part, mediocrity. And this team has been above average, but I've never felt that this team was dangerous at any level in the Mike McCarthy era. And so when Jerry says, we're keeping Mike for one more year, we're all in. When I hear that, you better be out there spending some money because we know Jerry's got the money. They did nothing in free agency, nothing. So it's laughable, to your point, so laughable. And I honestly think that it's going to end up going up in smoke. They're not going to pay Dak, and they'll go through whatever the rebuild looks like for them. But they shouldn't have to because Jerry should be out there wheeling and dealing and spending some money.
Well, he's just setting the table for firing Mike McCarthy. And then next year, what you're going to see with the Cowboys is head coach Bill Belichick, defensive coordinator Nick Saban. And then all they'll have to do is find some offensive coordinator that can manage to score 14 points a game because that's all it'll take with those two guys on the defensive side of the ball.
Stop. That's ridiculous. Although Bill Belichick being the coach is not out of the realm of possibility, but I do not see Saban going back to the sideline. He is going to get a cushy job.
He's going to be the commissioner of the new version of college football whenever that happens. That's my guess.
Okay, I'm with you there.
This is the first year. I don't know what it is. First year in however long. We can pull it up for next time. And how many years? First year in how many years that we don't have a Bill Belichick or a Nick Saban coaching in college or the NFL?
Ooh, it's been a really long time because Bill
Probably
Belichick,
since the early 80s at least.
Probably. That's actually a good point. And at some point they coached together on some of these staffs too. But
Cleveland.
Yes. So you also have the Eagles. Remember how weird the Eagles season was last year? All the hope. They almost won a Super Bowl. There was some weird tension with Nick Sirianni.
It's going to be weird again.
You think so?
Oh, yeah. Because the OC, they fired him, but he was a scapegoat. It's going to be weird again. The beef is between Hurts and Sirianni. And
they're already asking Sirianni about it in the preseason, and he's like, I don't worry about it. That's what he has to say. Weird. But if they come out and are 2-2, watch out because things start to go downhill. And guess who's more expendable? The guy that's not the quarterback. So Sirianni, and I told you last year, Sirianni's stuff was cute while they were winning. But when they start to struggle, it's not cute anymore. And he never changed his shtick. And I don't see him as a guy who wants to change his shtick. But guess what? You're going to get fired if you don't start winning.
You can be eccentric, or whatever you want to call it, but you can't be eccentric and bad.
No,
that's, you know what I mean? Look at I think about baseball. Think of Turk Wendell, right?
Yes.
You can't be Turk Wendell, but not be a good pitcher.
Yes.
Right. Or Mark Fidrich, right? You can't be Mark Fidrich, the bird. But not still be a great pitcher. You if you're gonna be, you're gonna have some of the antics or whatever, some of the shtick. You better be able to win too. And I think you're right. And I heard something that said that one example was last year. So it sounded like Hurts and the OC were sort of they were maybe on the same page, and so they would change calls on offense. They would go rogue between the two of them. But Sirianni though, I can't remember the game because they referenced the game where they called Sirianni wanted to run play, but they called some sort of pass thrown out of field. They ended up losing the game basically as a result of this field play. And Sirianni in the post game, he took the blame himself. He owned it like it was his fault or whatever. So he did the right thing in that situation. He didn't throw his quarterback or his coordinator under the bus. Even though it was their choice, it wasn't what he wanted, it wasn't what he called. They went rogue. I think that the tension still exists between Sirianni and Hurts, it seems. Now, I think a lot of us maybe underestimate the ability for people to, in high stakes things like the NFL, to bury the hatchet and be pros. I think that there's definitely the potential that these guys can coexist for, to chase a common goal, but yet to be determined.
Yeah, and especially when it wasn't as easy as it was 2 years ago. If it's
because they were ahead of schedule a little bit a couple years ago, right?
100%.
And now it's the expectation.
Yes, that I'm telling you, and we're going to get to that with the next division too, a team that will have expectation. But to round out the rest of the NFC East, the Giants, sure, and the Commanders have
Dude,
wait, hold up, go ahead.
the Giants. I feel I feel bad for Daniel Jones.
Yeah,
The organization has
well,
put him in a position to fail. Like, it's not his fault that they paid him hundreds of millions of dollars. Like, you know what I mean? Like, he's just there and employed. Like, and they're like, hey man, like, we think you are awesome and we're going to pay you all this money because we don't think we can find anyone else to be as mediocre as you are. I mean,
that's the part right there. The
I
fact
just, you can't hate him. Like, hate the organization.
it sucks for him because they extended or they overreached when they drafted him number 5. And they never really had a team around him. He never looked good. Remember all the fumbling he used to do? And I used to think like, oh man, that's tough because as a quarterback, fumbling usually isn't your problem. It's usually throwing interceptions, bad reads, and you can work on guys with that. And I mean, he went to Duke, right? So obviously he is a fairly smart guy. And then he kind of put some things together and they went to the playoffs, won 10 games, looked like crap when they played or they beat the Vikings and looked like crap after that. But he kind of earned himself some leverage. And the Giants were in that position that we just talked about. Now, they only paid him $40 million. So they got a discount in comparison to what these guys are getting now. But you're right. They felt like, okay, we have to pay this guy. They'd already paid Saquon. And so now they have these two guys. And they didn't really do well last year. They did worse than we thought. But I think they worse than a lot of fans thought. I knew that they were coming down to their mean. And I feel like this year it's going to be the same thing, but they're in that weird, just Bermuda Triangle of like, they're not good, they're not terrible, they're just middling.
It sucks because I think that Brian Daboll is a good coach.
I do too.
He's stuck with a bad quarterback. I wouldn't say bad. I mean, these guys are going to starting quarterback in the NFL if you're bad at being a quarterback. I mean, but an underachieving quarterback. And, did you see any of the Hard Knocks stuff when they basically like let Saquon walk?
Yes, I did.
Or whatever. Like, so awkward.
Oh,
like,
yeah. But
I mean, if you're that GM, like, if they're bad this year, like, I don't know how they retain that guy.
Yeah, but it's not. I think that not paying Saquon was a good idea because it's hard to justify paying running backs, especially one with that much wear and tear.
Sure, but they could have got him. It seemed like they could have got him for less than what he ended up signing elsewhere for had they just done it initially. That's what was crazy.
I agree. Giants, ever since Gettleman took over and ever since Eli left, like there's just not been a lot of good business going on with the Giants. I mean, that's kind of been New York's shtick recently, hasn't it? Just not good business. And the Giants at least have a couple Super Bowls out of it. They have 3 or whatever. But like at the same time. 4, excuse me. But at the same time, it's like right now, just don't trust them. And the Commanders have like some talented guys, but obviously with a rookie quarterback in Jaden Daniels, who has actually looked pretty darn good. I think that they're going to be a team to watch over the next couple years. Like they got rid of Daniel Snyder. Hopefully they'll run better. They make some good personnel decisions that, things like that. I think that they're a team that, I mean, they have the potential to be like the Eagles where they could arrive early if Jaden Daniels grows, but he's still a little bit raw, but I think he's got the talent, and they could be a team to watch now that they may be better run.
Yeah, I think so too. And they're going to benefit from like we talked. Some other teams are going to be the victims of expectations. I think they're going to benefit from expectations. I don't think there's a lot of high expectations in Washington.
Agreed.
And so they're going to have time to grow and develop, which you don't really get a lot anymore in the NFL. And so hopefully they can take advantage of this grace period, if you want to call it that, and get things rolling a little bit. I mean, you miss the days of, I think back to the late 80s, early 90s, man, when you had the Giants, Redskins, and, and even the Eagles and Randall Cunningham. I mean, those are some heavyweight teams, man. Mm-hmm. And even through for a long time, the AFC East was hands down the best division in the NFL. And it was not uncommon for 3 teams from that division to make the playoffs. And man, here lately, it has been pretty mediocre. For the most part.
Top heavy for sure. And I think the next division, the NFC North, which is another division that you like, this is the division that has some of the oldest teams in it, right? There's a lot of standing rivalries there. But I think when you talk about expectations, Dan Campbell and the Lions, man, this is the year where they're going to have expectations on them. They are no longer ascending. They have arrived, and now can they stay there? And that is really hard to do for teams and franchises like that are not used to consistent winning. But I do feel like Dan Campbell is the guy who, as we said last year, he's going to do it the way he knows how, the way that has worked, and he's going to stick to his guns. So he is going to live or die by his gut feeling and what he thinks is the right thing to do. And if you want to stay consistent in winning, you need a guy who is willing to put himself out there, make the tough decision. And Dan Campbell is that guy, and the players love him. So I would not be surprised if the Lions are contenders again this year, but something to watch out for.
Yeah. So the NFC North is the local division for me, being in Central Illinois. So
That's
obviously
true.
a lot of Packers, Bears rivalry talk exists. I think, and yeah, you're local to the AFC and NFC East both, or maybe more so AFC North. You're kind of in the middle of a few divisions, I guess, where they
Yes.
overlap. But yeah, I think when it comes to the Lions, you know, is MCDC, is he going to be Nick Sirianni, or is he going to be the type of guy that has some staying power, that can establish himself and his culture, and that's going to transcend, over time, and to be determined. But I think that it's for those folks out there who yearn for the days of the past and the hard nosed NFL. You're probably rooting for a guy like Dan Campbell and his ways to sort of keep that grit alive a little bit. And it's hard to not root for the guy, because I mean, because a lot of coaches don't show emotion, right? They're very stoic, and
Robotic, yeah.
it's hard to not root for a guy that you see that very apparent that he cares a lot about his team and about winning. And it's tough not to get behind a guy like that, man. Like, so unless you're someone that's a fan of a team that's a rival of the Lions, uh, tough not to get behind him. And I'm going to be in his corner again this year. Really looking forward to it. And as far as the rest of the North goes, Jordan Love and Green Bay, I think they're looking pretty good. I think JJ McCarthy got hurt.
Yep, he's
I
out for the
believe
year.
so.
Yep.
He's out for the season in Minnesota.
Yep.
And I was Caleb Williams. I was critical of him coming out of USC. Not high on him, but I've heard some things. I've heard some things about him though that have got me feeling a little different. And but these are like intangible things, and I understand these are not the things that necessarily show up on the field or translate. But like, I heard something where in the locker room and training camp where he said, like, he got on the team about not picking up after themselves. He's like, hey, it's not, the janitor takes the garbage out. It's not their job to pick up after you off the floor and whatever else, like, stuff like that. And it's like, okay, like if that's the way you're wired, I think you're going to be okay. Like, you at least have like the DNA to set yourself up for success.
It's your instinct to like lead.
Yes. And so, I mean, there's no denying that he's got the skills that are needed
Sure.
to be successful. And I think, we've seen many guys come out of college that have tremendous skill sets. But when it comes to like putting that together with all those intangible things and leadership, they've fallen short. And so, we'll see what happens. But like, I'm kind of changing my expectation a little bit. Like, I think that he has a fighting chance. It just the Bears have been another organization that's been a little dysfunctional.
A little.
So it's just a matter of like, are they going to give him what he needs to have an opportunity to be successful?
I don't think we got the right perspective on Caleb Williams last year, because the more time that goes by, I mean, he's looked pretty decent, I would say, in the preseason thus far. And I think some of the leadership stuff you're talking about, I was reading about that as well. I wonder if perhaps at USC last year, Lincoln Riley did not recruit a defense at all. And I think that that's frustrating for a guy like Caleb Williams, who's laying it out on the field. I mean, yes, he had a couple of bad games, which happens. But at the same time, he also, for the last couple of years, has shown that he has tremendous talent. And Lincoln Riley really did him a disservice by the way that he structured that team in totality.
Yeah, and because what I said about him at USC was I felt like he would like intentionally extend plays to try to like play hero ball and stuff. Like, he wouldn't he didn't appear to me to be the type of guy that would stand in the pocket and like go through a progression. It's like he wanted to create his own offense and this and that. But like if you're playing, if you know that you're going to have to score 50 points to even stand a chance to win, like you're going to play outside yourself. And it's a hard, you can't like, it's really hard. I have to imagine to decipher between like when like it's okay to play within the system and when you have to go make a play. And so if you get like hardwired that like, hey, I have to go make a play and we got to score 50 points, otherwise we don't stand a chance to win because we're not going to stop anybody. Like it's really hard to reel that back in. And so I think that you can't blame him so much. And I know I was extremely critical of him, but it's really hard to blame him for doing the things he did under the circumstances that he did them. And so now we'll see. I don't know what type of defense the Bears have put together for him. And, like I said, there's a lot to be determined. He's gonna face adversity as a rookie. It doesn't matter what's around him. He's gonna face adversity, and we'll see how he handles that.
Yep.
But I think what we could all say though is he's gonna have a chance. He's gonna have an opportunity to prove himself, and I think he has a better chance of succeeding than I originally anticipated.
Look at you. A little bit of growth saying, look, I might have been wrong. I mean, that's what we do here on this show. All right. The NFC South is another division I just do not care about, but I think the Falcons might be the most improved. Yeah, woof. But I think the Falcons might actually be most improved. But again, another franchise that I've not been able to trust because they haven't really done anything to make me feel like I can trust them. But on paper, with Kirk Cousins there now, they theoretically should have a good team that can win this division. The Saints, I think, are a team that's kind of weird because their quarterback situation isn't that great, but they signed Chase Young, so they have somewhat of a chance, but I'm just not in on Derek Carr, to be honest. And then, of course, you got Baker Mayfield, who, in my opinion, should have been comeback player of the year, and Joe Flacco be damned, and yes, even Damar Hamlin be damned because Baker came back and had a great season. This team, in theory, should still be in lose now mode because they want to rebuild ever since Thomas Brady left. But here comes Baker, baby. And I loved it. I loved watching Baker play last year. And I think the Panthers are just going to be a hot disaster because I'm not sure Bryce Young is the guy. But as a whole, this division is...
It sucks, man, because I feel like with the Panthers, I feel like they had a really good run with, Jake Delhomme and then into,
Cam Newton.
On the heels of that, Cam Newton. But I feel like that's a city that like could really fall at risk of like losing a franchise if they go into like a decade of like just being bad.
Yeah.
And they are on the cusp of that.
Their attendance was horrible last year.
Yeah. I mean, and like when we were down there for the tournament, man, like they were talking about how well the soccer team draws.
Oh my God. They draw like crazy.
And so, if you can't get, I mean, it's a growing city too. So it's like, man, if you can't get people to show up to watch the NFL, you're in trouble.
Yeah.
And so,
I'd say so.
And so it's really sad to see that because, the Panthers had been really consistently good for a while. And, I agree with you on Baker, man. I love me some Baker. He's got that like chip on his shoulder, the underdog, undersized, all those things. He's a poor man's Drew Brees. That's my
that's
my
good.
take on Baker.
Okay.
And he's the type of guy I think that kind of can galvanize a city. And it'd be fun to see him do that down there, especially on the heels of Tom Brady.
Yeah,
right? It'd be fun to see because you're never going to fill those shoes, but I guarantee you, if Baker goes to have 5-6 years of like success, he will be more beloved by those people than Tom Brady was for coming and winning a Super Bowl. You know what I mean? I just think that, but I just, I don't know, man. That's my thought. And then so, Atlanta, you're right. Is there a guy that you want to see win a Super Bowl more than Kirk Cousins?
Yes.
I mean,
yes.
I say that because he just seems like the most like average person. Like I watch a lot of these other guys play in the NFL, and I'm like, man, like that guy, I can tell just by watching it that guy is so different than me or the average person, like so supremely talented. And Kirk Cousins just seems so like you could bump into him at the grocery store and you may not even recognize him.
He is
he just seems like the
guy.
everyman.
Yes, he is. He is. But I will say that like as a personality, I don't find myself being like, man, I really want that. Yes,
he doesn't have one.
He does, but it's not polarizing. Polarizing doesn't even necessarily mean that you would root for the guy, but it's just so benign. And like Baker, I'd love to see Baker win a Super Bowl.
Yeah.
To me, that would,
you're right.
and Jared
Kirk
Goff's the
Cousins
same
is
way.
Ned Flanders.
Yeah, but Jared Goff's kind of the same way. Like Jared Goff to me speaks benign. Like he's not, oh my goodness, Jared Goff just has so much personality drip. And now quarterbacks in general don't normally have personality, but Kirk Cousins is like a line below that. And trust me, I mean, I think that he's a decent human being. I think he's got all the right tools to be a good, like a good person in life. He's got the right mentality for things. And yeah, I'm sure people criticize him for his Christian beliefs and so forth, whatever, right? I think as a football player, though, I mean, he would love to win a Super Bowl, and I certainly wouldn't be mad at it. But as far as like, who would you like to see more? There's other people I'd like to see more.
And you're right. I just think that he seems so ordinary that it's like it's something that like the average person could like relate to. You know, you feel like, hey, that's like my neighbor winning the Super Bowl. You know what I mean? Like, is the way that it would feel.
Kirk Cousins is what would be created if you asked ChatGPT to create the quintessential male Kohl's customer. That's what exactly what would
Suburban
happen.
dad.
Yes, and that's what would be made because that's what he is. And he lives, eats, and breathes football, and that's what he does. And after football, he will eat, sleep, and breathe his family and his religion and blissfully have a great life of community service and doing all that good stuff. And hopefully we'll be still doing this show. But last one before we get to the end. So you have the NFC West. And up until now, this has been the 49ers division to lose in some fashion. There's a little bit of drama, I think, in San Fran land. And Purdy, people still aren't sure that he's the guy. Brandon Ayuk doesn't think he's the guy he wants out, obviously. George Kittle is getting older. Deebo Samuel, obviously, if they have less weapons, he's got to stay on the field. Christian McCaffrey's getting up there for running backs now, so you got to watch his usage rate. And Kyle Shanahan continues to be the guy who can't bring it home.
That's a tough one, man, because it's like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it when it comes to Purdy. I mean, the guy's gotten you there.
No argument here.
He's doing the job, right? And now in a situation like his, I can get on board with the whole like devil thing, right? I mean, it's like, well, the guy's getting in a Super Bowl, like, let's roll with it. I guess you could try to pull like the Rams, like in what they did with Goff and Stafford. You could try to pull a switcheroo with somebody to upgrade.
That's tough because Stafford was elite when they sent him away from Detroit. Like you could tell. I don't think we're quite there. That's the strange part about Purdy. Purdy's very similar to Tua in the way that Tua's dynamic, but you're not sure if it's the system or not. And Purdy's kind of the same way, but he came within a few yards of winning a Super Bowl. So it's like, which one is? I mean,
but Jared Goff was in the Super Bowl with the Rams, right?
They weren't that close to winning that. Like, yes, I agree with you, but at the same time, I think McVay knew that Goff wasn't his guy before then. I'm not sure that Kyle Shanahan doesn't think Purdy is his guy, although he did try to make Trey Lance his guy, and that failed miserably. So, like, that's the thing, is it's a weird situation for a team that has been so consistently good and made the Super Bowl 2 years in a row. We're like, is Brock Purdy the guy? We're still asking. We're going to be asking it all season long.
Yeah, and it's a tough situation, and until he does win, it's going to be. I think that question is going to linger, and because what stops him from being the next Tom Brady? The only thing that's is a couple Super Bowls, and people are starting to have that conversation, right? And now, not that that's an easy thing to achieve, and you're right, the supporting cast is aging in ways, so especially with McCaffrey, and he is like the X factor because he is one of the few running backs that's still in the league that is truly a dual threat running back
when he's on the field,
and can the guy changes the game. He's a game changer when he's on the field. And I think that like operating without a guy like that would be extremely difficult, especially on what is perceived to be I don't know what you want to call it, game manager style quarterback.
Yeah.
When you lose like your best tool, but we'll see, man. I can't really make a call on it how I feel about it. I feel like there's too much left to be seen to make a definitive statement one way or the other on where Brock Purdy stands. It's interesting that Ayuk wants out. I mean, is it directly because of he feels like Purdy's not the guy, or is it a money thing?
It could be both because there's been a lot of smoke with him. And I do wonder if it has to do with, maybe it's a target share thing too, but perhaps he thinks that Purdy is not the guy who can get him the ball as much as he wants. I don't know. But this is a team that has performed really well, but has this uncertainty heading into this season that feels like it's been percolating for a while. And usually when you're this consistently good, you don't have these kinds of issues. But they do have it in San Francisco. So it's just something that I thought was interesting because when you look at the rest of the division, the Seahawks, obviously, they part with Pete Carroll, another guy who'd been around forever. Bring in the Ravens defensive coordinator, I believe. I can't remember his name, but they should be better defensively, which is something that they struggle with. But offensively, they're still rolling out Geno. So, I don't know what to expect there. I mean, he's been decent, I would say. But is he the kind of guy that can elevate? Not so sure. The Rams obviously had a great season last year. Puka Nacua emerged as this amazing rookie threat. Matt Stafford is definitely getting into the twilight, if he's not already there, of his career. Is Puka Nacua as a result of him, or is he, like Kenny Golladay? Remember, he signed a big contract with the Giants, never saw him again. We'll see. And then the one that intrigues me the most is Kyler Murray and Maserati Marv. That's going to be potentially really fun to watch because you want to talk about two guys that can be dynamic and make some plays. They got him there.
Yeah. And I think they're like the wild card, man.
I agree.
In the NFC West for sure. I do think you're going to see I feel like the Seahawks will be consistent. It's just a matter of if they're going to have enough to compete for the division championship. But I think they'll be in every game they play. I feel like they'll be average. And then it depends on how these off the field things impact the 49ers and how is the aging Stafford still have enough magic left in that arm to keep the Rams relevant? And so, interesting division for sure. Way more interesting than the NFC South, as we just discussed. I think there's a lot of storylines, right? There's a lot of storylines in that division, and so very interesting to see how it plays out. It's I think it's hard to pick against the 49ers right now today.
Yes.
We'll see what happens. It's incredibly fascinating. Again, really excited to see what happens with Kyler and Marvin Harrison Jr. in Arizona for sure. Because new head coach this year too.
I don't remember. I thought
they brought a guy in. I thought.
Who knows? I don't know. I can't.
Who knows?
It's so hard to keep track.
We're
honestly.
only a football podcast.
Yeah, we're not. But we're not a football podcast. But I can't remember every single Joe Schmo that comes through and coaches these NFL teams for a cup of coffee.
I can't either.
But it'll be interesting to watch. I think that we overall have a lot of exciting storylines potentially this year. And you and I will definitely go back on some of our takes that we just had when some team that we said is going to suck starts 4-0. And then all of a sudden they're 4-5. And we're like, see, we told you. So we'll be all over the map. That's right. We'll be all over the map. But the one question I think that we have to ask is when we look at the entirety of the NFL, is it still the Chiefs versus the field? Has anybody come out that you feel like, yes, the NFL is a ton of parity, but the Chiefs have overcome just about everything the last few years. Can they three-peat?
Yeah, they can for sure. Today, August 18th, it is the Chiefs against the field. I would say.
All right.
I just there's not enough known elsewhere to say otherwise, in my opinion.
Yeah, they're a team that, much like as you said, the Belichick Brady Patriots, they are kind of the team that you believe in until they prove that they're not. And we've doubted them for sure. You and I think 2 years ago during that inaugural season of I&C, we were like, are the Chiefs kind of on a downswing? And just time and time again, Andy Reid, Mahomes, this is probably Kelsey's last run. They have proven that they can take anything and they've overcome so much adversity. I think that right now, as you said, August 18th, it is the Chiefs versus the field. But how do you feel about the NFL if you're out there listening or if you're watching right now? If you are watching at the bottom of the screen, 703-718-6314. US, of course, is the number there. If you want to call us and give us your opinion, who's your team? How do you think they're going to do? What takes do we have that are basically crappy? Probably all of them. We would love to hear that. And of course, if you're listening in the podcast space, you are more than welcome to do that as well. But my man, we just recapped looked at the entire NFL in an hour. How do you feel?
I feel good about it, man. I think that was some good NFL conversation. Well-reasoned NFL conversation.
Not research, though.
No, definitely not. No, nobody has time for that.
We don't have interns around here.
No, we prefer off-the-cuff, emotional knee-jerk analysis around here. So we got that by the truckload. So
Oh, yes.
I think no, feel good about it. I think it's gonna be a good season. Like barring injury to Patrick Mahomes, it's the NFL runs through Kansas City, no doubt about that. And of course, there's always a surprise team that emerges. There's always the highly touted team that underachieves. We'll see who those teams are here shortly, but looking forward to a great football season. I'm so happy, so happy that we're here, man. Like, I mean, next Saturday, week 0 college football kicks off, and we're off and rolling, man.
That is correct. So next week, we will be going over the entire landscape of the newly redesigned college football and kind of looking at week 0. We aren't going to be going over every single conference. Obviously, there's just too many teams to talk. Although there's less conferences, more teams in them now. But obviously, we're going to hit some of the highlights. I'm really excited about college football for sure, even in this new landscape. And we're going to get right into it. As Brad said, we are full bore right now in football, and we are going to give you as much content as we can. Don't forget Football Frenzy every single Wednesday live, and we will repurpose that content on Saturday and Sunday mornings for people who like college, people like the NFL, or if you like both, watch all 3 because it is just that good. If you want to follow us on social media, you can find us. We whore ourselves out on just about every single social media platform. But if you're listening in audio and you're listening on Apple and Spotify, subscribe, ratings, reviews, whatever is appropriate. It does help a little bit. And we need to know what we're doing well and what we're not doing well. But Brad, it's always good to see you. To everybody in I&C Nation, we appreciate every single second that you take out to listen to Iceman and Coach and any other content that we put out. But folks, we will see you next week. We hope everybody is well and safe. This is Iceman and Coach. The opinions and viewpoints expressed on I&C Sports are those of Matt Freites, Brad Powell, and their guests, and not necessarily those of the Matty Ice Media Network. I&C Sports is exclusively owned by Matt Freites and Brad Powell and is brought to you by the Matty Ice Media Network.